Everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everyone, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary friends to UWIHARP's Sexual Health Dialogues. I'm Monique Springer, Project Officer with UWIHARP, and I'm joined today with Ms. Keelia Anderson, our Project Assistant, and Kamal and Samuel, Technical Support Technicians from the Classroom Technology Department, and everyone will be providing some support for us today. A very special welcome to our students, staff members, off-campus partners, repeat visitors, and to our new guests. UWIHARP is the HIV Sexual Health Unit at UWI, and we seek to positively influence the sexual and reproductive health and wellness of the university population and the wider Caribbean society. Our primary focus is the development of sexual health literacy among the community through programs such as our digital dialogues. These are informal sexual health conversations and will be held during the semester. They include the S-Files discussion series on a wide range of topics and the SHOP series, which will focus on sexual health issues among our vulnerable Caribbean populations during COVID-19. You can look out for our flyers on our different social media platforms, which include Facebook, Instagram, the UWI app, and also through UWI emails. There are a few participation guidelines and notices. All mics are muted and videos are turned off. Q&A will take place after the presentation and the mics will be unmuted as needed. We ask you to post your questions or comments during the presentation in the Q&A pod located at the bottom of the screen. We aim to address as many as possible at the end of the presentation. For those questions we couldn't get to, please email them to uwiharp@capehill.uwi.edu before the end of the day, and we will address them shortly afterwards. The sessions will be recorded, and the recordings will be posted afterwards on our social media platforms, including our YouTube channel, UWIHARP Cave Hill. These will be done without sensitive personal discussions to protect participants' confidentiality. Please note that we cannot guarantee confidentiality in this public forum among participants, so be cautious about what personal information you disclose about yourself and others. It's safer to talk in general terms. Please also complete the evaluation form that will be sent to you immediately after the session. You can suggest topics that you're interested in for us to facilitate. Now, we do have some rules. A few of these were adapted from the HIV 2020 online. UWIHARP's digital dialogues provide a safe space to address a range of sexual health topics using a sex-positive approach. We encourage participants to share their knowledge, experiences, and opinions in a respectful manner. You may disagree with views highlighted today. However, please be respectful of other outlooks, regardless of your religious or moral beliefs. Let us be mindful in the way we discuss sensitive topics. UWIHARP operates on a zero tolerance policy for any kind of abusive, discriminatory, belligerent, or disparaging comments or actions that may cause distress to presenters and or participants. Persons who engage in any undesirable behaviors will be immediately removed from the webinar unannounced. UWIHARP follows the first do no harm guiding principle. And today's topic, we will be looking at equal rights and justice for the transgender community. And it's held to mark Zero Discrimination Month, which started with Zero Discrimination Day, commemorated globally on the 1st of March. And it's to advocate for the prevention of discrimination among vulnerable populations. It started in 2014 by the then UNAIDS Executive Director, Michelle Sidibé. And it's now observed by several UN member countries, CSO, and international organizations. This day reminds us that there's a lot of work that needs to be done still as it relates to the human rights and social justice for vulnerable populations, subaltern communities, and social groups who are displaced to the margins of society. According to CDB, everyone has the right to be treated with respect, to live free from discrimination, coercion, or abuse. And these communities also include for us, of course, the LGBT population, where gender inequalities and harmful gender norms are catalysts to deny civil liberties, bodily integrity, citizenship, and protections under the law. And today we have a very special presenter. We have Ms. Alexa D.V. Hoffmann. She's a Barbadian-born and based trans advocate and human rights defender with a specialty for policy change and legislative reform. With a footprint spanning nearly 10 years, Ms. Hoffmann's efforts in advocacy include assisting with the organizing of a pilot project for Barbados Pride in November 2015 and the first official Barbados Pride celebrations in November of 2017, both of which were supported by the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network, and the latter launched at the Canadian High Commission's offices. She's also the lead claimant in a petition to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the IACHR, challenging sections 9 and 12 of the Barbados Sexual Offences Act, which criminalize all forms of same-sex intimacy with life imprisonment and 10 years imprisonment respectively. And today's discussion, we will look at the need for workplace anti-discrimination protections for transgendered persons, and also advocating for the decriminalization and recognition of same-sex relationships and intimacy. And to begin with, in simple terms, I have a simple definition for transgendered people, and there are those individuals whose gender identity or gender expression differs from the sex anatomy that they were assigned with at birth. And today's framing thoughts based on Alexa's experiences with workplace discrimination and contributions she has made to the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Bill and what happened to those contributions has really given me some thoughts to consider, which have been captured very nicely by Jackie Alexander in her Pedagogies of the Crossing 2005, where she speaks about the deployment of sexuality in nation state formation, which is the complicity of state and corporate processes in the manufacture of citizenship, normativized within the prism of heterosexuality, and the indispensability of both processes to the project of nation building, which often inaccurately is assumed to be a completed project within neo-imperial social formations. But are they really completed projects? We will hear from Alexa today whether this is indeed the case. I'm going to invite Alexa now to share with us some of her experiences, especially with regards to her experiences with workplace discrimination, and also with her involvement in providing contributions to last year's Barbados Employment Prevention of Discrimination Bill. Alexa, I invite you to share your experiences with us today.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alexa Hoffmann. Let me see, with regard to employment discrimination, this is something that it always hits very close to home because of the many experiences that I've had with being either deemed unsuitable for a job or even being penalized in the course of doing my job for grounds that have nothing to do with whether I'm qualified to do it or my ability to do the job or my conduct in throughout the course of the job. The one incident that really has been, I'm here trying to find the right words. The one that has really been sticking with me for obvious reason would be the most recent experience, or one of the most recent experiences, where in 2018, after 3 years of working as a legal assistant, I was constructively terminated from my job after effecting an official name change. Now, what constructive termination is, it is pretty much like being terminated. Only thing, it is not done explicitly so. So instead of being told you're fired or we have to let you go, you're effectively being prevented from either coming into the workplace to do your job or being prevented from carrying out your tasks. And this can be done whether through a hostile work environment, such as sexual harassment, bullying, blackmail, whatever the case is. In my case, I was without notice, and when I say without notice, without even being told you're due for a vacation or your vacation starts here and ends there, I was told to take several days off. It started off as one and was then extended and extended and extended until I had to put my foot down, where immediately after I presented the paperwork saying that I had my name changed, I was asked to take 1 day off, 1 day turned into 2 days. And then I was told, well, we'll call you back later when we're ready for you to return. As time went along, I came to realize something was wrong. While it was customary every now and again to be given a day or two off of work, the manner in which this round was going about, something just didn't sit right. So when I had to make my investigations, I then found out that there were ulterior motives. I had to confront my boss, demand to know why he was doing it in this particular manner, and especially why was it happening so close behind me telling him that my name had been legally changed. And it was at that point that I then realized that I was being constructively terminated. I ultimately had to bring the matter to the Labor Department. They were unsuccessful in mediating the dispute, and so it has been forwarded to the Employment Rights Tribunal. It was actually during the course of 2019 that the tribunal basically took up the matter, and currently we're waiting to have the matter heard and resolved finally. And even though it's the first time that something of this particular nature has happened to me, it is not an uncommon one, whether that is, in the region or throughout the world, where LGBTI people, for whatever reason, whether it's because they've been outed or they've voluntarily come out, or, some sort of detail about them that hitherto was never an issue, suddenly becomes an issue, and it is used as leverage and ammunition to prevent someone from being able to do the simplest thing, which is to go, pull your weight, contribute to society, contribute to the economy, and ultimately take care of yourself. And that is why I find employment discrimination to be a particularly heinous thing, because it's not just a situation of, oh, well, our company has these rules or we prefer to do things a certain way here. It now steps into the realm of, because of something that has nothing to do with the job, we're going to determine whether you eat, we're going to determine whether you sleep comfortably, we're going to determine whether you are able to take care of yourself and those closest to you. And when you start playing those types of games with people, it becomes very dangerous, because you don't know what predicament someone may be in, that the job may mean so much to them. I know people that they have children to take care of, they may have dependent relatives to take care of, their own situation may be so precarious that they may be 1 or 2 or 3 paychecks away, or even half of a paycheck away from everything falling apart around them. And then people decide to manipulate and interfere with the stability of that person's life. That is where it's the equivalent of playing keep away with someone's oxygen and they have emphysema, or deciding, you know what, because you have so annoyed me, I'm going to step on this line that's for your life support, knowing that you can go into severe distress, if not die. I put the two on the same level because of the damage that can happen to a person's life. And depending on how precarious that person's situation is, it can even lead to that person's death, whether it is death caused by external circumstances, or they become so desperate, so lost, that they take what they believe is the only way out. So that is why when it comes to things such as the Employment Prevention of Discrimination in the Workplace Bill, it was something that when I first found out about it, I wanted to be a part of it. Unfortunately, by the time I found out, it seemed like it was a done deal. All discussions had been had. They happen on a very low-key level. So I don't ever recall any public advertisements saying, oh, we're reaching out to people to discuss this or that, because if such a thing had happened, I would have been there in a shot, and I would have made sure at any cost that my story was told, not just for the sake of, oh, I'm telling this story so people know, but telling the story, sharing my experience, so that those who are responsible for, enacting policy and bringing about the necessary change, whether it's legally or otherwise, through the legislature or otherwise, they have an idea of what it is that they're trying to bring about. From my experience with law classes, I did law at BCC years ago. There are rules of interpretation, and one of them is called the mischief rule with the purpose of approach. And that is those who are in Parliament, when they're debating the law and they're drawing up, drafting up the various sections and subsections, there's always a question in their mind: what are we trying to prevent when we put it in this context? What are we trying to prevent when we put this law about? So with that being said, for them to be able to hear the experiences of a trans person who's dealt with firsthand employment discrimination, who knows the effects that it can have, when you bring the mischief rule and the purpose of approach into play, it informs them, okay, here's part of why we need this law, so that someone else like Alexa, or someone else like calling another trans person by name, or someone else like any other individual, whether or not they're LGBTI, they don't have to go through this again. There's a reduced risk of them being exposed to this. And that's why it was very disappointing when I was informed that basically the EPDB was a done deal, that it was already, going to go before the Parliament and be read and all of that there. And
sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to get a little bit more, if you could recreate that moment when you found out that it was going to be debated. Had you drafted anything? Were you thinking through any of these things before you heard that it was going to be tabled for discussion or debate?
Well, this was during the year when everything was at its height. The Labor Department was trying to do its mediation. I first went to the Labor Department in December of 2018, so a little over a month after the incident happened with the workplace. The Labor Department started their mediations in February, and it continued right up until about June or July, when the Employment Rights Tribunal were finally written to and asked to take on the matter to hear it. When I found out, it was in, I want to say October of 2019. And I found out in the entire circumstance as to how I came to find out was purely accidental. I wasn't supposed to know. Basically, a friend of mine from Peru messaged me on Facebook to let me know that someone whom she knows, Victor Madrigal Borlos, the UN independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity, she was sharing with me a post that he made where he was saying he was looking forward to meeting with civil society advocates, especially in the LGBTI community, with regard to, what was it again? It was with respect to any moves and changes that had been taking place in the island over the last few years. And that one message, it caught me off guard, because I'm like, I don't know anything about this, but somebody all the way in Lima, literally Lima, could tell me, this person is coming to your country. And so then I got another, because at the time I was with the United Caribbean Trans Network. So one of my colleagues from Trinidad in that organization, she also reached out to me and she said, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I'm like, still wondering, is this connected to the same thing that Marta was telling me? But I played a little dumb and I said, what are you talking about? She says, oh, XYZ. And she showed me the exact same thing. I'm like, so this is something going on regionally and I don't know, something's wrong. So it led to me poking around, and it's a good thing. This is why I love networking, because you never know who you can come in contact with. I messaged one person who was with, if not UN Women, UNDP, and it was a series of emails that ultimately got me down to the assistants who were working with Victor. And that was when I found out that it may not have been possible for me to attend that meeting, because it was the final meeting in a series of consultations that have been taking place that entire year from the very beginning, where apparently Victor and his team would have been meeting with people throughout the region. In some cases, some people would have had to board planes to go to another country to meet with him. And that's when I realized something was going on where I was decidedly cut out of the loop. And I argued my case. I didn't care how I looked at that point. I could have looked totally psychotic. I said, you know what? As an LGBTI member, as a trans woman living in Barbados, you're coming here to discuss things that can impact on my life. You're discussing things which I have a certain expertise, a certain knowledge and insight about it that would be invaluable to you. And since I didn't know anything about this, I have reason to believe that, the Barbadian trans voice may be left out of the table. So I'm going to respectfully insist, and I literally said this, I'm going to respectfully insist that I be allowed to have an opportunity at the table, even if I'm there just to witness and make observations. So
remind us about what date that was then?
This would have been in October of 2019. As much as I'd like to look through my emails, it's going to take
that's fine. That's fine.
No, it's just a force of habit that I look through so that I can see when exactly something happened. But nonetheless.
And this meeting specifically, remind us, this meeting that they were coming to, that you invited.
Right, it was a consultation with the United Nations independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity.
Okay.
So
what happened from there at that meeting then into last year?
Yes, so ultimately I was able to attend the meeting because a few people ultimately had not turned up. So when I showed up there, I, took my seat. I listened to what was going on because since it was impressed upon me, these consultations have been happening for months. So I was coming in totally unaware of what was going on really. But as I listened and I was hearing, Victor was congratulating the local LGBTI advocates on drafting a bill that was supposed to go before Parliament to deal with workplace discrimination. And immediately a warning bell went off. I'm like, we already have the Employment Rights Act of 2012. What's this bill they're talking about? So I had to go around the room and ask some questions, and there was a labor officer there from the Labor Department in uniform. So I approached her and I said, can you shed light on, what's this bill that you're talking about? And she's, very exuberant. Oh, yes, we have this new bill. It's going to deal with things like unfair termination on the grounds of sexual orientation and so on and so forth. And I let her cup run over. And I ultimately, when she was finished, I said, okay, I just have one question. For the last 7 years, we've had a law on the books that should be dealing with these things. It specifically says that we have the right not to be unfairly dismissed. However, that law is deficient in that right doesn't kick in until 1 full year after you have been working. You have to be working continuously for a full year before that right is conferred upon you. In fact, before many of the rights in the Employment Rights Act are conferred upon you. Why not table amendments to the Employment Rights Act instead of drafting an entirely new piece of legislation that you then have to be playing a guessing game to make sure that the new law isn't pitted against the old law or doesn't basically obsolete the older law? Why not do that? And
okay, Alexa, again, just so all this happened at that same UN meeting?
At that same meeting.
Yes. Okay.
So she was unable to explain. And that was when I realized, okay, I need to, and I was even asking her, where can I find this so that I can look for it? And she told me that it was on the government's Parliament website. And I had searched that website for months after that, did not see anything. I was able to find everything else from amendments to the Road Traffic Act, right down to appropriation bills and everything. I wasn't seeing anything to do with the employment, employment, anything. So I'm like, what the hell is going on? Pardon my language. And it was finally in June or July, the talk started to build up and someone shared on Facebook a PDF document and I immediately lunged at it. I clicked it and there it was. This bill that apparently the way it was embedded in the Parliament's website, it wasn't going to show up in the table of lists if you merely use their search engine or just click bills and started scrolling like I was doing. And I'm like, how? Because I even went back and I'm like, how is it that she's got this thing? It's clearly on their domain and it's not there. So it appeared like it was hidden out of view. So that was disturbing in and of itself. And when this document finally came out, it was only about a week or two before it was supposed to go before the House of Assembly. So all I could do at this point was download the document, read it through, make my observations, and I'm writing and typing and, you know, checking with this person and that person and saying, look, this bothers me, that bothers me, you know, this and that could have easily been fitted into the previous law and so on and so forth. And I'm literally going off. So when the time comes, House of Assembly sits down, I turn on the radio, I get my laptop, I'm playing stenographer. Anything that is said, everything that's said, I'm taking notes. And of course, I noted the arguments, various arguments that were raised. I even, you know, typed down quick quotes from when got up and he said that there were more important things to be concerning ourselves with than trying to protect the jobs of LGBTI people. There are worse ills out there. And he went as far as to say, you know, you've got these ZR drivers that are doing X, Y, Z, and the PSV operators that are doing A, B, and C. And you got people that interfering with, you know, women on the road and people interfering with young girls. And those are more important things to deal with than trying to protect the job of, you know, an LGBTI person, just roughly paraphrasing what he said. But it was clear he felt that LGBTI jobs were not as important as, you know, the issue of road safety or sexual harassment. Not that any one issue is really to take precedent over the other, unless it is to the point where it's causing actual damage, not just to the individuals who are directly impacted, but to those around them. And, you know, just like a reckless ZR driver, just like I don't know, a serial rapist or someone who makes a habit of sexually harassing people, employers who think that it's perfectly fine to interfere with someone's bread and butter for something that has nothing to do with the job is equally serious, because as I stated earlier, it can ultimately lead to someone being so unable to take care of themselves, they either starve to death or become so desperate that they take their own lives. And so, you know, I would not put any of those issues on a top shelf above another, because it all ends up with someone being hurt, those around them also being hurt, and the emotional aspect of it can be so severe, it can lead to that final desperate act. So with that being said, I, you know, made all of my notes on the House of Assembly, and they said, okay, we're gonna, you know, push this thing. They did it in a very hasty manner. They had their arguments and their debates. And when it comes to reading through the bill, they don't actually read through it in Parliament. And I think that's something that ought to be done, because then it allows John Q. Public to have an idea of what this law is going to demand of them, what it's not going to demand of them, and if this is something that they think more consideration should be given to or not. So they just said it will be read a second time. It is read a second time. It will be read a third time. It is read a third time. The bill is now passed. So that's how it went through in the House of Assembly. Next stage was the Senate, which was to happen the next week. And the Senate was even more interesting, because that was a moment where I started to feel a bit of vindication when I actually got up at one point and said the exact same thing that I said nearly a year prior to the Labour officer. These things that we're debating in this bill, why were they not considered as amendments to the already existing Employment Rights Act? And I just had a huge heaving sigh of relief. It's like, okay, so I'm not the only one thinking this. And then just like how it was in the House of Assembly, got up and she, by the way, if anybody is not aware, she got up and she told a Bible story, which she blatantly tried to dress it up as if it wasn't. But any of us who are familiar with Bible stories would know. In fact, another reverend, I can't remember his name, he actually busted her immediately after and called her out for having told the story of Simon, I think it was. And in the course of, shall I say, speech, she went as far as to take a flying jab at trans people, saying that there's this leftist ideology that's permeating our circles, and going on to say, oh, gender is not assigned. Gender and sex are a matter of hermetically sealed principles. I'm using her exact words. And she, as she's seeing all this trans this and trans that, she would like to see some people who have trans sense. And the way how she dressed it up, it was clear she was making jabs. And I was reading everything that she said. I'm the sort of person, I don't always take what you say for face value. I try to read between the lines. And it was clear that she was trying to insinuate that transgender people are mentally unstable, that we're in some ways stupid, because why else would you want to talk about trans sense and having common sense and integrity? That was the other one that I took umbrage to, that we have no sense of integrity, we have no sense of character. And it got to the point where she was practically beginning to yell and carry on, because as far as she was concerned, she was so tired of hearing, you know, LGBTI ideologies, LGBTI advocacy, and now it was planning to make its way into legislation, and she hoped to see the day where that no longer was the case. And I just made careful note of everything that was said, because I knew the next word that was going to come out there was going to be me, because here it was, my experiences were not only prevented from being able to be heard, here it came before the parliament, both chambers. There's another moment that I felt relieved, which was when he made reference, indirectly without mentioning my name, he made reference to having read of a story where, and his exact words were, where someone's sexual identity came to light and they were terminated for it. And I was there saying to myself, okay, so there's some consciousness that's been raised on my issue through my own efforts, going out there and talking. Why is it that it couldn't have been translated into this act? You know, why is it that it had to be limited only to sexual orientation and not gender identity? And I believe that with the number of years that I've been in advocacy, the number of years my face has been out there, you've got Be Glad, you've got Equals, you've got all these other organizations, and they also work with transgender people. How come sexual identity, gender identity and expression was left off of this bill and only sexual orientation was included? Because that basically means a gay person, a gay man, a lesbian, a bisexual person, pansexual person, they're protected under the law, but a transgender person like myself, a gender non-conforming individual, a non-binary individual, evidently is fair game. And that's why I, you know, hang on so tightly to my case before the tribunal, because it is intended that it will ultimately have to set the precedent that, you know, bosses cannot decide for reasons based on someone's gender identity. You can't just go and terminate them out of their job. And the reason why my case is structured that way is because in the Employment Rights Act, under the protected classes for discrimination, gender just by itself is listed. And depending on how you want to look at it, gender can also and has also been known to include gender identity. So it's because of that bit of semantic playing that we're having to do, among other fairly solid arguments, that is why you should not be able to discriminate against a trans person. But because it's not something that is so clear cut, laid out before you take a wrong step, that's why I felt it was necessary for gender identity to be very clearly listed, that you can point to it and say, look, transgender people are protected because it falls under gender identity and expression.
Okay, thanks so much for sharing, Alexa. I have a couple of questions. Firstly, do you see the situation there with the Employment and Prevention of Discrimination Bill? Do you see any more inroads to argue or present your case, or to argue, agitate for the LGBT community? Or is that a done deal, or as Jackie Alexander said, a completed set of organism?
Well, I'm looking at it two different ways. Even though it was passed in the House of Assembly and the Senate, ultimately it needs to be, at least this is the best of my knowledge, it's supposed to also be assented as into an act of law by the Governor General. To the best of my knowledge, that has not happened. I am also not aware of the law being officially called the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Act. So to the best of my knowledge, it is still a bill that's, you know,
bill, yes, it's a bill.
Right. So it hasn't yet become an act of law. So
No.
nobody is yet bound to do anything under the terms and the conditions of that bill. So with that being said, I am not sure if there is a chance that it can be, because the Governor General can decide, you know what, no, send it back, or she can decide, you know what, certain changes need to be made. I'll make these changes, whatever the case is. So there is that possible window.
Right. So is
To,
that an entry point then for you to then communicate with the Governor General that these things have been omitted?
I have been giving it some thought. However, because of things going on personally in my background, and because it's entirely been me doing a lot of the talking,
Yeah,
I can only do so much. I only
I
have two
agree.
lungs as big as my mouth is. I can only
Agree.
do so much, and I can only say so much in a space of time.
That's actually what I want to ask you about too, Alexa, because in one of the articles, you acknowledge that the government of Barbados has omitted trans persons and gender non-conforming persons from this
Mhm,
bill,
mhm.
and that local LGBT activists are silent about it.
Yes, disturbingly so.
But do they know what's going on? One,
Well,
and have they been communicating, or is there need then for advocacy to bring in the larger LGBT community to have input in an amendment?
well, I'll say this. Let me start on the amendment comment. I'm glad you brought that up. The organizations and advocates and activists are, how should I say, they are placing bets, for lack of better words, on the possibility of an amendment to come up. But let's be realistic here. The Employment Rights Act was enacted in 2012, and the EPDB had its readings before Parliament 8 years later. For me to expect that further amendments, further efforts to plug gaps and
Yeah,
close up chasms, you're basically telling me I should be waiting an additional 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. I'm 27, okay? Another 8 years means I'm in my mid-30s, and that means I have to spend another roughly 10 years being subject to even more workplace discrimination. Okay, let's ignore my tribunal matter. Let's say I didn't have that experience.
yeah.
Okay, like any other trans or gender non-conforming individual trying to find a job, there's still going to be fair game until such a
Exactly.
time as the law, whether it's through the legislature or judicial precedent, says you cannot fire a person. Okay, that's something falling off my desk. You cannot fire a person, suspend them, place them on extended vacation under false pretenses, whatever the case is. You cannot do that for reasons relating to their gender identity or expression. Now, in relation to the silence, and it bothers me to a point where I literally lose sleep about it. How is it that you have organizations that cater to the needs of trans people? Here's an opportunity to ensure that trans people, where you have situations, because I can tell you trans people are being hit hardest in this pandemic, because when some of us have to do sex work and curfews get in the way of doing that, social distancing protocols and whatnot mean that being able to do sex work the way how you would normally do it, that's hampered. So that's your income gone for a number of trans people. If you're already dealing with workplace discrimination, you're having trouble finding a job, you're having trouble keeping your job simply because of who you are. And if, like me, you've been breadlined and you don't have savings, you don't have a support network to keep you afloat through the pandemic, here comes an opportunity to try to make it easier for trans people to get a job. And instead of someone looking at the fact of, oh, your name used to be this, now it's that. Oh, your gender marker is this, but you look that way. Look at the CV. Look at how that person is doing their job. Here's an opportunity to ensure that that happens. And you pass it up. And then it comes out. And and the thing is, they've put their name on it to say, we've had these consultations. Even members of parliament and members of the Senate were defending this bill tooth and nail, saying this is no willy-nilly thing. We had meetings with Joint Select Committee, we had meetings with members of the community of marginalized populations and so on. So here it is, all these LGBTI stamps were put on it as having been consulted. How is it that you were consulted and trans people were not considered? And I asked this question, and I was made to understand by an individual, I will not call their name, if they wish to step forward and say something, they can. They said that there was a representative from the transgender community who was at the Joint Select Committee meetings, who put the case forward on the table, but they weren't heeded. And that made my blood boil more. I'm like, you brought a stakeholder to the table to be heard, and they were ignored, and you're fine with that? So that's where it really causes me to lose sleep, because what's the point of bringing that person to the table if in your mind you're going to, basically make peace with the fact that they're going to be ignored? Because the same way how they could have ignored that transgender representative, they could have ignored the the rest of the LGB community, and sexual orientation may never have taken shape on that bill at all. Would you also be as quiet and mute about it? And in fact, it was disturbing to note that when I started to speak out and I started to, write my articles and send them out to whomever will publish them, whomever will get it that exposure, because I needed for awareness to be brought to this thing, to say, look, this is what's going on. All is not well. Um, there were colleagues from around the region who were showing these Zoom meetings where even being shown on screen, and some of the things that he was saying, he was defending the bill, defending the work that the advocates were doing, and it seemed like he took umbrage to the idea that anybody would say that people were being ignored and that there wasn't any care or thought put into it. But as far as I'm concerned, that's exactly what happened, because you're not even saying, okay, yes, we dropped the ball and we're going to try to fix this right away. The same way how when the Welcome Stamp initiative came out and it left out LGBTI couples and all hell was raised, that commitment was made, okay, we're going to fix it. To the point where when remote work legislation came about and whatnot, you took those steps to make sure same-sex couples were included. Why are you not putting that kind of gusto to make sure that trans people are protected? After all, we have bills, we have people to take care of, whether it's ourselves or others. We have just as much a necessity and a right as anybody to go get a job so we can take care of ourselves, especially in an economy that demands you must have an income if you want to survive.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. I know there's a question in the chat pod, but we'll get to that towards the end. There is another question I want to ask Alexa before we move on to the other point about decriminalizing same-sex relationships and intimacy. Do you see any opportunities or ways forward to actually get the inclusion then in this bill at all?
Well, I mean, from what I'm here thinking, the only way that you can ensure that is if you raise awareness about it. It's just like you're trapped in a room, bang on the door, holler, say straight, let me in, let me out, whatever you need to say, so that someone finally opens that door so that you can become a part of the party again instead of being shut in the wine cellar or whatever. Just like how I was doing last year, write how it makes you feel. I made it clear. I felt like I was betrayed, not just by the government, but even the advocacy organizations who they cut me out of the loop. They didn't allow me that opportunity to put my case on the table. And I was being told, well, you just have to sit and bear with it until whenever we can, in my opinion, be bothered to fix it. So for that, because I wasn't going to take that lying down, as I said earlier, as you know, I've written about the issue. I even tried to start a petition on All Out to try to get some signatures to get them to, pull this bill back up, look through it, send it back to the drawing board, get the issues fixed. Unfortunately, it didn't work out like that, but I am not going to give up hope, because as long as I have breath in my lungs, as long as I have my voice, even if I lose my voice, I type at 80 plus words a minute, I will write something. So, and what would really be helpful is that those who are also aware of the impact, those who understand the implications of being left out of legislation. You don't have to be a trans person. You could be a disabled person. You could be a woman. You could be a younger person in the workforce. Age discrimination is still a thing. If you have had any kind of a horse in a race similar to this, that's all you need to qualify you to step forward and say, you know what? Everyone should be able to get the job that they need to take care of themselves.
Yes. Okay, Alexa, thank you so much. And because time is moving along, believe it or not, it's quarter to. I want to look at the other part of the discussion and advocating for the decriminalization of same-sex relationships and intimacy, and why this is important.
Right.
So in 2018, you and two other activists launched a legal challenge against the nation's anti-sodomy law. Can you give us an update on this? But first, I need to hear, why is this important? And I was looking at the
Sexual Offences Act.
Sexual Offences Act, and I do have some queries on that, because a lot of the language to me seemed quite opaque and somewhat ambiguous. But maybe you can tell us why this is important for us to consider, and then if there are any updates on that challenge.
Okay. Well, first, let's start with the act in and of it. In fact, let me start with how I came to be in a position to bring it before the IACHR. And I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. Yeah. Barbados signed and ratified, we signed it in the late 1970s, I think 1976 or 77, the American Convention on Human Rights, and we ratified it in 1983. And there were provisions in the convention that are supposed to prevent discrimination. And what wound up happening was that in comes 1992, when the Sexual Offences Act came about, and the way in which the laws operate, especially if you consider the Commonwealth history of anti-sodomy laws. I'll throw out some required reading. Look up the Wolfenden Report of 1957, and that gives you a brief history of how a lot of these laws work. Even though the police say, oh, we don't readily enforce them, believe you me, they can be enforced at any moment at the drop of a hat. And when you look at the provisions of the law, especially where sections 9 and 12, buggery and serious indecency are concerned, they criminalize, in the case of buggery, it's meant to refer to anal sex. In the case of serious indecency, it refers to any act involving the use of the genitals to arouse or gratify sexual desire.
Yeah, but sorry, can I interrupt here? Just because in going through the act myself, I found the definition of serious indecency, which according to the act is an act, whether natural or unnatural, by a person involving the use of the genital organs for the purpose of arousing or gratifying sexual desire.
Absolutely correct.
And I am there like, okay, but doesn't that also include consensual sexual acts?
That's what I was about to talk about. Anything as exactly what it's saying, natural or unnatural. That was the ye old English way of saying
colonial.
People's sex or it ain't straight people's sex. So whether it is a man and a woman, two men, two women, two non-binary people, whoever. And not only that, natural or unnatural, referring to the possibility and the likelihood of it resulting in a pregnancy. So you go through the whole gamut: oral sex, fellatio, you name it, all the lovely, dirty, is illegal. So things that even the men on the block like to brag about, oh, how they get the girl to go and do X, Y, Z. I don't know how clean I need to keep the language here, but how they got her to do this, and he do this to her, and she did this all in his face and all that there.
Oh, that's illegal.
According to the Commonwealth, the common law principle of these laws, he's been bragging about committing an offense. Is the equivalent of him saying, man, I stick at the gas station and I get $250, man. I shoot that gun so nice. It's the equivalent of him doing that. And the police, if they heard him, could decide to haul him in, question him, and even charge him, especially if they can identify who was the other person.
Right. So the interpretation is that any consenting adult who married, or does this include married? To me, it seems like
they don't care.
Married or single, not married, who engage in consensual sexual acts.
That is not exclusively penis to vagina sexual intercourse resulting.
That is not what indecent. What's it? That's not what serious indecency says. It is any act.
What I spoke about?
Any act involving the use of genitals.
Whether natural or unnatural, I told you the two contexts. Natural or unnatural, referring to whether it's a heterosexual act or whether it's one.
That's what I'm saying. I think we're singing the same song, huh? We're singing the same song, but for me, my interpretation is any consenting adult, even hetero, engaged in these acts.
Yes,
or
definitely.
committing an act of serious indecency. Okay, time is going,
Precisely.
but I just want you then to tell us why it's important then to address, to challenge these anti-sodomy laws.
Well, I mean, okay, let me put it this way. If you look through the Wolfenden Act, there are actual cases that they have gone through where they explain, let's say it's a situation where, I'm just here trying to call off the top of my head. There's a case in there where this guy, apparently there was a dispute where he was either robbed or his house was broken into. He went and he reported the incident. And when the police asked him if he knew who it was, he gave a name, and they asked him, how did he know the person? He explained, well, this person and I, we used to have an intimate relationship, XYZ. And at that point, it turned from being a burglary robbery investigation to an investigation on, I think it was buggery, because of the nature of the relationship this guy had with the person who stole from him. And the next thing you know, yes, they're pursuing this robbery charge, but he's also being put before the courts, to answer for this relationship that he had, which really wasn't even a part of the main reason that he
Right.
came in to begin with. It was just how he knew the person.
Right.
So imagine now, there are even other situations such as the police are out doing their beat and they see someone in a certain predicament and it arouses their suspicion. So they go to ask questions. They might observe maybe someone is injured or they hear a noise or a scuffle or something. They go to investigate. And again, in the course of investigating, they find out about this relationship. It then opens up anybody involved to be subject to the law courts. And that's exactly the mechanism that these laws, even in 1992 and in place in 2021, in the Commonwealth, that is how these laws are expected to be enforced. That the police, in the course of doing their usual duty, if they pass my house and I have someone here entertaining for the night and they hear, I don't know, a scream, a shout, a yell, whatever from my house, and it arouses his suspicion, the police officer's suspicion that he thinks something is wrong, he can actually come and knock on my door, doing what in his mind is a welfare check. And then upon realizing, oh, well, this is a couple that one is a trans woman and the other is a cisgender man. And, let's say they're partially undressed or, there's reason to suspect that there's sexual activity going on. Next thing you know, me and my dearly beloved in the back of a police car heading to Oysters police station,
Right.
to then be explaining what were we doing in the house and XYZ. And we could end up being put before the courts with the
Yes,
possibility
I
that
understand
either
that,
or both of us.
Alexa, but I need to know that why it's important then.
Right.
Tell us
So,
why it's
so this is
important
now
to change these laws.
right. So the same way how it can happen to me, it can happen to you as a heterosexual woman. It can happen to even a married couple in the course of what they're doing, especially since it's looking to attack anything, whether quote unquote natural
Exactly.
or unnatural, simply because you're arousing and gratifying sexual desire. Even though it's a consenting adult, the law is still going to sit there and say, well, you still can't do this, you still can't do that. Do you really want to be in the position where the police can be privy to come because, oh, well, they have to uphold the law and they think that you're breaking the law? No,
Right.
that's, the same
So
way
we
how you
talk about rights. We talk about human rights
exactly, you have your right to
as a
privacy. You also
consenting
have
adult.
your right to dignity. Can you imagine being
Right.
dragged through the courts and photographed? Oh, 27-year-old Alexa Hoffmann on charges of XYZ, whatever. I sure as hell don't want my name on the
Right.
court pages for that.
Yeah.
So with that being said, it's necessary not just for me, but even if my mother, may she rest in peace, were alive, I tell her straight, it's important for you to do it. Because
Right.
were she and my stepfather both alive and they did something, decided to spice things up, the police could even come and put both my parents in court if they
Right.
wanted to.
Right.
So it matters. It's not just an LGBT
Yes.
issue. It's also
Correct.
a
Yeah,
cisgender
that's
issue.
where we wanted to get to. The
Mhm.
need to address it as a human rights issue, that sexuality, sexual pleasure is also a human rights issue. And we have
Yes, it is.
to include language on sexual pleasure. We generally don't in this field, um, of course, being between consenting adults, to be a human rights issue. And there's lots of work that's written about sexuality and sexual pleasure as human rights issues. But I wanted to
Mhm.
get quickly then the update on the case, the 2018 case with you and your
Mhm.
colleagues,
Right.
bringing the legal challenge. Can you say anything about that, where that is, if
I,
anything
I, I
happened?
believe I believe I can speak safely on it.
Mhm.
like many court cases, IACHR will take some time to snake its way through, but we are making some progress. We were able to get a response from the government during the course of last year. It was asked for since 2019, but they didn't reply until last year. And they gave their reasons as to why they felt the case should not be heard at the IACHR. And, you know, they gave their various arguments and whatnot. My legal team, we sent our rebuttals to what the government wanted to refute. And so right now it's at a stage where it's currently in a back and forth. So the government says, and I and my we and my legal team, because I also have to remember, even though my name is the one that's readily identifiable, there's still two others that I also have to look out for. So, you know, the government says this and our legal team says that, and it's going to be in that back and forth. What's going to happen, hopefully sooner than later, is that the commission is going to give like a preliminary report, basically saying what they believe their recommendations would be. And this would be a very, because of the terms of the convention, it would be very kept under wraps because it's going to be a draft. So they don't want anything to be put out as being too committal. It's just going to be a draft, like, okay, so far this is what they're thinking. You all need to take a look and see what you can do. And, you know, if there are challenges you all are going to have, and let us know, and so on and so forth. Some time is going to pass. The government is going to say, you know, what has taken place. You know, our legal team is going to say, you know, what has taken place, what still needs to take place. And then from there, the commission will adjust its preliminary report into a final one and say, all right, well, this is what we have decided, X, Y, Z in terms, and it's usually recommendations. So in light of the laws, likely it would be, we recommend that you repeal these laws, you put X, Y, Z in place to prevent it doesn't happen again, put measures in place to crack down on discrimination or to prevent discrimination. And, you know, it's nothing, it's not like the government is having a gun forced its head or being made to do anything untenable. It's just basically saying, well, remember, you did ratify this.
Exactly.
So to toe the line with the provisions, you need to make sure these human rights are not infringed.
Yes.
So with that being said, right now we're in the back and forth stage, but I am looking forward to, you know, seeing that preliminary report, looking forward to seeing, you know, how seriously the government is going to take the situation, and ultimately seeing what the outcome will be. But in terms of anything specific, because again, the IACHR does have certain rules meant to protect myself as well as my other claimants. I don't want to go into any exact detail, even on what the government did say. But suffice it to say, it is moving along.
Okay. That's encouraging. Thank you so much for that. I know there is a question. I'm going to ask Kelia to read the question, and there's some comments in the chat pod as well. So go ahead, Kelia, if you can. Is it just one question? Whatever questions are there, if you can field the questions to Alexa to have her address them. Thank you.
No problem. One question: what can others do to support the bill and support you or the trans community in the actions you are taking?
Well, I'm going to answer this in as brief and striking home as possible. First thing to do, just listen to us. Listen to what we're saying, listen to our experiences, listen, because even when some of us may sound like we're venting or we're freaking out, even listen to that. It may seem like a benign issue to you, but if it has us to the point where, because even I noted at one point about 5 minutes ago, I was on the verge of almost hyperventilating, because it's an issue that is a serious one, and it is one that it has an impact, and it's an impact that I am well aware of, that I don't want to have to run afoul with it. And so likewise, when it comes to things like employment prevention of discrimination, workplace protections, when trans people, gender non-conforming people, intersex people, when we're speaking, even if it sounds like we're whining, even if it sounds like we're, you know, so defeated, listen to that, because it's saying it's taking a toll on us. And that's why it's also important to do something about it, that it doesn't take a toll on us, because we already deal with, you know, homophobia, we deal with transphobia, we deal with gender-based violence, whether it's someone deciding to put hands on us because they are so infuriated by the fact that we are living our lives differently from they, whether it is we are having challenges with getting the police to cooperate. We don't need the added strain of, on top of all that, we can't pay our bills. On top of all that, we can't, get into a 9 to 5 that make sure we can buy groceries, that we can take care of ourselves, that when we're getting particularly depressed, we can say, let me buy myself something to treat myself, to lift my spirits, or whatever the case is. So that's the first thing, listen. The second thing is, when you're hearing us speak, if there's something that we may be putting forward, and you're also listen, not just listen to us, but listen to also what other people are listening to. And if that there's a gap in between the narratives, is something that we're saying that that you're hearing, but yet other people aren't hearing it, take the opportunity to help us amplify the voice. Take the opportunity to say, I'm also hearing amongst discussions with members of the community that there's this concern or there's that concern. Maybe we should spend some time, addressing this issue. And once we get that listen and amplify thing going on, and you can't amplify it without listening first. Let me make that abundantly clear. You cannot amplify without having first listened to us. Because if you don't listen to us, you don't know what you need to amplify. Because you could either end up adding white noise into the mix, or you could end up repeating something that somebody's already saying and doesn't need to be repeated. You could end up being redundant. So
okay, so are there platforms that you can direct those that are listening to get some of this information as to how they can listen or get engaged? Or
you mean in terms of helping to listen and amplify?
Yeah.
Basic social media. People are tweeting, people post on Facebook. I post ad nauseum on Facebook. You have Twitter. I'm trying to build back up my habits on Twitter. Even looking on YouTube, there's so many mini documentaries, some that I have, taken part in, some that others throughout the region have taken part in. Take a watch, take a listen. There are podcasts about the place. Just listen and share. And, even if it is, even in your own WhatsApp groups, you have your little group chats, stir up some discussion. Hey, I saw this on YouTube. What do y'all think about this? Or I saw this tweet, can I have your thoughts on it? It is as simple as that. Your smartphone, it is a lot more powerful than we give it credit for. And as soon as we understand how powerful it is, we then come to learn it is even more powerful than that. So all those apps, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, WhatsApp, you name it, use them. That helps to ensure that you can listen to somebody, because there's somebody who's talking on one of those platforms. It gives you the opportunity to listen to them, and it gives you the opportunity to help amplify, because however many friends you have, however many followers you have, how many subscribers you may have, when you put something out there, they're bound to listen. Somebody in that number is bound to listen to it. And in turn, it's almost like a pyramid. This person tells their friend, and they tell their friends, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, it's out there.
Thank you so much. That is very true. Social media is a buzz at this time. Okay, we have one more question.
Okay.
Is the Human Dignity Trust or the Equality and Justice Alliance lending their weight and support to you and this issue?
Human Dignity Trust, I have not been approached by. What was the other one?
Justice Alliance.
Justice Alliance?
Yeah.
I'm honestly not familiar with them. So I can readily tell you they've not reached out to me. However, what I can say is that from when my matter came up, like I said earlier, it's a good thing to network. So at the time when I had just been terminated from my job, my boss at the time had still owed me my salary. So I didn't really have anything much to go on except certain savings. And I had to budget my savings. And my main concern was, okay, how the hell am I going to pay for a lawyer? So I contacted a friend of mine. He is an attorney. And I said, look, I need help. Is there any way that you can help to mobilize legal counsel for me? So he reached out to Caribono, and Caribono put me in contact with the attorney that I'm now working with. Hitherto, I'm keeping his identity on the low, just because I want to, keep it on the low to avoid any foolishness. But he's been very helpful. He has put so much time and effort on his own to, prepare the case. And I've been keeping him very close to me. That there are times where he's like, Alexa, just relax, let the Labor Department do what they need to do. I'm like, no, I need you to pay attention to this. And he came to understand why I wanted him to pay attention. And recently we had Outright Action International. They contacted me to, find out if there was any way they could assist in the case. I said, well, you know what? The best person to ask is my attorney. So I put them in contact with him. And actually this morning around 7:30, He messaged me to say, hey, well, remember a few weeks ago, you put me in contact with them. I submitted a proposal to get some people to assist with this and that. They've accepted the proposal, so they're on board. But we have to have some discussions during the course of next week to find out exactly. I mean, he may have an idea. I don't fully know because I'm leaving it up to him. But nonetheless, I am being brought into the discussion that I'm aware of, you know, who may be coming on board, what role they may be playing. And that is good because it takes some of the strain off of him. And it gives me a bit of a chance to breathe a little easier because it's now, okay, there are other people who are taking this on, because let me tell you, this weighs on my head, like I said, to the point where I lose sleep. So to know that it's not just me that's doing all this pushing, it's not just my attorney who's doing all this death by 1,000 paper cuts, but there are people who are helping, that helps. Of course, if anybody else wishes to step forward and they wish to render some sort of assistance, you know, they can feel free to reach out to me and they can put you in contact with, you know, my legal team. Let them tell you, you know, what it is that they may need any additional help with. Or, you know, even if it's a case where it's someone who just wants to keep an ear out, that they can help to amplify the voice as things go along. You know, every bit of help helps.
That's very
Okay,
true.
I want to thank you so much because we're out of time now. And I want to thank Alexa for sharing your stories with us. I also want to thank Kelia and Kamal and Samuel for providing technical support. There are a couple of comments that we couldn't get to in the chat pod. I will email them to you, Alexa, and then we can probably get some responses. I have shared, tell me if you can see it, I have shared Alexa's contact info.
Yeah,
Can you
I've
make
seen
it
it on the screen.
How do I do that?
Make it bigger? Click the, click that.
Well, when I
There you
click
go.
in,
Yeah.
oh,
Where is it?
Click the back arrow. Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
beautiful.
Okay. So I have included her contact info here for anyone that wants to, oops, to
You can't do
contact
anything
her.
on your screen at the moment.
You can't see it?
Yes, you can, but if
We
you
can
press
see it now.
anything, it will
Don't
remove
click,
it.
don't click
Right, yeah,
nothing.
okay.
Don't hit no keys. Don't touch
Yeah,
nothing to
I
your
know,
keyboard.
right? So I just want to thank everybody for the attendees that joined our conversation today. This is a very stimulating conversation. Time just flies. Alexa, as always, you're very engaging. Kelia, thanks again for your technical support, Jamal and Samuel. And listen out for our next series of discussions. In April, we'll continue with the S-File discussion, and we have one shop discussion that will focus on sexual health issues during COVID. And have a good evening, everyone, and take care.
All right, and everyone take care. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.